Oh, well, I find it fascinating. I've always been fascinated with logic problems and logical stuff. So,
Mhm.
uh,
Hello, everybody. This is Michael Beverly. Welcome to my podcast. I have Mark Reed today in his most challenging debate.
I think that is a shallow and okay. I cannot argue with that logic. I can't argue with that logic.
You won, buddy. You won.
You did.
You won. Steven just won his first debate. We'll chalk that one up to the grace that you gave him for his. He held his own there for a minute.
Look, I've seen worse arguments, quite frankly, and that's horrifying. But yes,
you've necessitated a mind before us. You lose the debate. The mind before us, I call God. Done.
No,
it's justified.
No. Yeah. Stop beating your chest.
Yeah.
So I'll explain what's happened here.
You've been beaten.
It is funny. So everybody, welcome to the real start of the show. Mark Reed has. Well, I wasn't really in this quote debate or discussion, but you talked about the Bundy Behe thing that I hosted, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So that really wasn't supposed to be a debate. It was supposed to be more of a discussion, but I was naive. I was naive and I was way out of my league. And I didn't know what to expect, but Jay was very gracious to do it.
Right.
As a friend, he agreed to do it, and he taught me a lesson about those kind of things. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was maybe a little bit about what motivates you, how you see, is it entertaining to you? Is it entertaining to you? And you also think there's a value to it, or, is there a mix there? And, I just kind of explain a little bit about where you're coming from.
Oh, well, I find it fascinating. I've always been fascinated with logic problems and logical stuff. So, for instance, when I was a kid, I figured out why you remember that movie Labyrinth, the two doors kind of thing? I figured
vaguely.
It's basically one of these two doors tells the truth, the other one always lies. And then she asks what would the other door say? I basically, that really appealed to me, and I figured out why it worked. And she was absolutely correct in her logic kind of thing. Like at a young age, I was all into this idea of, well, that would actually work because of this logical system. So I've always been very just interested in how logical systems work. Like when I went to university, I did electronics as part of my computer systems and networks. So it was all about sort of logic and how it works. So sort of getting two arguments and expressing them and then seeing which one logically holds up better, which one is the more rational and reasonable argument, which one fits better, has always been really interesting to me. I enjoyed politics in school as well. So that idea of presenting things is also very fascinating to me. But it's more just taking these ideas and comparing them, and then basically I call it smashing them against one another and see which one breaks. So I seem to be able to go through and really dive in and see where the logic falls apart, and that's what I really love doing. Is basically thinking about something until it breaks, basically, and then whatever you're left with that doesn't is probably what you should believe. But I don't know. Part of it, I think, is because I'm on the autism spectrum. I get really fascinated with stuff like that. So I think maybe I really do enjoy debating, but it's not really to win a debate. Like I don't want to win necessarily. It's just I like coming up with ideas that I can't break. Does that make sense? Like the ones that I can't seem to shatter are the ideas that I generally will present in a debate, because I've tried as hard as possible to destroy them and I can't. It's nice to put that idea up against another one that then I can just break down and say, hey, my idea stands under that scrutiny and yours doesn't.
Have you practiced ever debating, arguing on the side you don't agree with as a tool or a practice?
Yes, I find it very difficult. I find it very difficult to do. I find it very difficult to present an idea as, this is sort of what I believe. I have done it before. I'm way more comfortable debating things that I do believe, but the switching side stuff, I don't really have a problem with doing that. I think Issa once asked me to, a guy I know, Issa, and I sort of said, no, I can't. Whatever the subject was, I couldn't sort of get my mind around it or think of anything that I wanted to present for it. But I'm not adverse to it. I'm just not as good at it. I'm too maybe I'm too honest. Maybe I'm just not, steel manning it enough that maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I definitely I dislike him a little. I mean, there was a mock debate I did with a guy called Christopher Maldi, and it was whether psychology was a real science. Like, it was a mock debate. Okay, so I really didn't believe that I was taking the negative. So I really didn't believe that psychology was just a fake science kind of thing. But the hate I got for that was incredible, because he didn't tell anybody. And everyone thought it was a serious debate, and people absolutely reacted so badly, like they were up in arms. So, and I guess there is a component of, is it right to do so? Is it right to, if I don't think that Christianity is good for society, or if I don't think that, say, Mormonism is good for society, would I stand up and debate for that? It's a moral question as well, but that less so. I'm not too concerned as long as it's made obvious. Hey, right. This is a debate where you have switched sides, rather than people not being told and thinking, oh, Mark's now arguing for Mormonism or something.
Sure.
Right.
Well, it's very valuable to be able to steel man the other side. So
sure,
if you weren't publicly debating on the Mormon side, you still might find yourself in a position where you'd want to be able to understand the steel man of the Mormon position, so that you could maybe debate against it or talk about it. Do you have a favorite area that you enjoy debating? For real, when you're on the right, you're on the side you believe in the strongest and have the most passionate for?
Yeah, I think I like morality the best. I think I find that really fascinating, what we ought to do and why we ought to do it. I think that it's one of the most complex things you're going to discuss in sort of the terms of philosophy, like, why people ought to take the actions that they should take.
Sure.
They're basically saying, hey, you ought to do this, and why shouldn't they do that? It gets so complicated. And if you don't believe me, then run down some trolley problems. Some you've got a track and a trolley splits. Do you pull the lever and kill one person, or do you let it go and kill 5 people? And then when you get more complex, it just becomes really, really difficult to decide whether to pull that lever or not. Like, that's essentially what it is. As it gets more complicated, the gray area starts to multiply, and I really like that about it. There doesn't seem to be a clear cut, well, this is what you should do, absolutely. I find it very disingenuous when people claim that. There's this black and white morality.
This is why there's certain movies that we all end up really loving and maybe not knowing why. It's when the heroes put in those kind of conundrums where there isn't really a true obvious answer. Like, everybody knows you don't kick puppies and drown kittens and, steal the lollipop from the baby. But when you present a problem that's a well-written or well thought out conceptualized trolley problem, it's super fascinating. And I think that's why we like that kind of fiction, because we like to think, what would I do in that situation? Because it doesn't have an easy answer. This is especially in sci-fi, military things or things to do with bombs or, those kind of big questions. I was arguing with my son the other day. My son's in the military. He's in JAG. He's a military lawyer. We like to argue a lot. Part of why he's a lawyer, I think, is growing up arguing with me. And I was saying, I'm always confused about this issue of rules for war. There's an old Star Trek episode where they've sanitized war, where people just show up when the computer says you're dead, you show up to the place to be killed. And you know, and they explain it to, you know, Captain Kirk. Well, we used to bomb cities for real, and that got expensive. So now we just simulate everything. But, you know, if your name comes up, you got to go. That's it. You're dead. And I said to my son, well, to me, it doesn't make sense. Why not unleash the most horrific, you know, biological weapons and everything? And he said, well, the reason is because you don't want, you know, you don't want to torture your prisoners of war, because you don't want, if you're caught as a prisoner of war, you don't want them to torture you. So you kind of countries make these sort of rules like, okay, if we capture your guys, we are going to feed them 3 squares a day and we're not going to torture them. And we expect you to do the same. But I always thought, boy, maybe war would be less likely if we said, no, there's no rules. We're going to specifically target your elementary schools. We're going to drop biological weapons and all that kind of stuff. You know, I'm not advocating that, obviously, but I think this falls into the kind of moral questions and conundrums that you're talking about as being quandaries that are hard, and you know, they don't really have exact right answers, right? It's like, when exactly in a field of combat is it okay to take a prisoner or to continue to shoot? When does a police officer have when does he cross the line between this is legitimate self-defense and this is not, right? Those kind of things aren't easy. And I always say to Christians, you guys say you have an objective morality, but you can't answer any of these questions. I don't know how we're in a different position. Have you ever heard a good answer to that, of how we're in a different position?
Well, on your thing with what I think it's a lot deeper than that. There's a lot more nuance to it, because essentially some of the things that we've come to in the 21st century, we kind of have learnt that humankind has the capacity to destroy ourselves. This started, say, the very origin of it was sort of World War I, where they started releasing mustard gas. And then, you know, the wind changed and suddenly it's your guys being affected by it. The same is true for the biological weapons that you mentioned. You know, like you release a virus to kill off, you know, all of the opposing soldiers, gives your guys the cures, but it mutates and suddenly you're all in the same boat. You release nuclear weapons or nuclear winter and we're all absolutely screwed. You know, like the problem is that humans have gotten so good at killing. It seems like we've had to invent rules to stop us from absolutely annihilating everything on the planet. And I think that's a good lesson to learn, that we've got to curb those impulses, or else we're the ones destroying ourselves. I think that if we look at it, things like the Geneva Convention is what you're talking about. The set of rules say, hey, this is acceptable in war, this is not acceptable in war, is sort of a response to the sort of wholesale destruction of World War II, you know, like looking at the nuclear weapons used and going, oh, that if everybody does that, you know, it is a existential crisis for the species, not just, you know, this country or that country, but for the species. And I think as we've gained scientific knowledge, we've started to look at, we actually have the ability to end our own species completely. And I think that, you know, sort of coming up with these rules is a way to say, hey, we've got to stop sort of threatening our own species that much. As for the sort of other rules of war, you're right. It's got a lot to do with reciprocity. That's one of the fundamental things in human morality, empathy and reciprocity. Like, if you don't do this to my guys, I won't do it to yours. Absolutely right. But I think there's something bigger where we're trying to say, hey, let's try not to wipe out our entire species when, you know, we're just trying to wipe out those people. Things like genocide and things, we know that it's absolutely detrimental to say, you know, the gene pool just to have one, you know, race out there. You know, it's absolutely detrimental. It's a catastrophe. So we've sort of, I think all of this has come with learning more about humans, our place in the world and our place in the universe. You know, we've only got one planet. We don't have another one to go to. So if we get this wrong, and we do create an existential crisis, you know, to atheists and people that don't believe in God, there's no God coming to save us. We're just done, you know, like 99% of species out there. So I think it is an acknowledgement that, hey, you know, the ability to survive is partially in our own hands. what do we do to facilitate that? And one of the things is, not releasing biological weapons. They can turn real nasty real fast. Not doing nuclear weapons or chemical weapons. They can get real nasty real fast. So yeah, I think you're right, but also that, hey, we've got to, humans are ridiculous in their ability to destroy. Like it's ridiculous. We're so good at it. We've had to go, no, we need some boundaries on this thing because we have become so good at it. Unfortunately, it does make me sad.
This environment, let's put a cap, let's regulate war, allows the sociopaths to push to the limit, right? So if I'm a dictator in a country and I know that you don't want to unleash chemical weapons, you don't want to unleash nukes, you don't want to do the the bioweapons, I can maybe invade and steal some of your land or do a certain amount of damage,
right? Because
I know you won't retaliate in the massive way. So it's sort of like a game of chicken where you're sort of going to be able to win because you're going to have that threat. And I wonder if not just saying to the world, okay, if you cross this line, I don't care if the whole world, I don't care if you guys are all extinct, so you better stop this behavior. Or this is I may sound crazy to people, but this is a thought exercise. Frank Herbert, well known for Dune, wrote a book about this called The White Plague, and it was sparked by this is complete fiction, but it was sparked by a terrorist act of the Northern Ireland. What's that?
The author of Dune, Frank Herbert.
Frank Herbert, yeah. The Dune author, yeah. So this is like an unknown, relatively unknown book of his.
Right.
And so the character in his story gets, his family gets killed in a terrorist action, and he's a biochemist or a bioengineer. And so he bioengineers a weapon. I think it's a virus, but it might be a biological weapon that kills only females, and he wipes out all the women in the entire planet. And he basically just says, sorry guys, I lost my wife because you guys couldn't get your shit together, so deal with it. And so the book is a sort of this moral, ethical sort of thing where he's now on the run, and it turns out there's a few enclaves of women that didn't die, so they're trying to protect them from not dying. But anyways, the reason I'm bringing it up is the idea Herbert was kind of showing is that if you don't get your shit together, somebody at some point is going to have a weapon. And now it's not dealing with NATO and the big countries, right? It could be one lone wolf, insane guy with a gallon jar of weaponized anthrax, smallpox, something that he just releases on the world or something like that. So I think I think it's something we have to think about. Like, wait a minute, how can we make the world? So let me bring this back to our discussion of debating. One of the hot debates right now is what's more better for society, Christianity or secular humanism? And I would argue secular humanism, because Christians wouldn't care if you ended the world. Like that's what they're waiting for.
Well, I just want to address that whole idea of one person with a thing. But there's sort of we try our best for security. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. Whether it's Guy Fawkes with a whole bunch of wanting to blow up Parliament and taking a whole bunch of gunpowder, or one person with some kind of crazed ideology. There's apart from security and our usual things, there's not a lot we can do about that. The more important thing is sort of with countries, like I think that you were talking about a psychopath grabbing land because he knows the retaliation. Obviously Russia and Ukraine at the moment, where Russia sort of knows that NATO will not actually do anything unless a NATO member is threatened or attacked, and Article 5 triggers, and then that will trigger the rest of them. But what the rest of the world can do, and this comes to sort of social, pro-social and anti-social behaviors, because the rest of the world has sanctioned Russia, and they have absolutely been economically destroyed. while it hasn't had the, huge massive death of, obviously war, it certainly has, they're basically, really not flourishing compared to if they didn't invade Ukraine, worked with the rest of the world, was a reasonable, rational member of the international community, and could sell their resources for an excellent amount, and could participate in basically the global community we have flourishing. They would be way better off than the path that they've taken, where they can't even afford to fix their roads and things like that.
Sure.
So there's way better ways to deal with a psychopath than just killing them outright. Right? There's way better ways to deal with it. And psychopaths get a bad rap anyway. Like, there's people like Putin, sure, yeah, he doesn't care about other people, sure, but usually psychopaths are transactional. They understand that, hey, if I do this, then I will get this kind of thing. So if they want things in life, they know they just can't go around attacking people. They will know this. So I don't really think that even war or triggering an armed response is necessarily the right move for on a geopolitical basis. You can do a lot more damage over long term with financial sanctions and things like that. That's why we use them. So and that doesn't kill a whole load of innocent people. I mean, it may make their lives very difficult, but that's still not killing them. Of the two, I would definitely go for sanctions. And so, sorry, what was your question about debating? I was sort of
so bringing that back to the topic of the debate between what's better for society, and there's a kind of a dual reason why I want to ask this question: Christianity or secular humanism, right? So when there's so many subjective things in a debate like that, is that part of my question is technical, like, is that a harder debate to prepare for?
Yes.
How would you look at it? How would you what would you try to focus on? And then the other thing is, when the other side, so like I would say Christians who are waiting for Jesus to come back and believe death takes you to paradise, that you can't really debate what's better for society, because they don't care ultimately about society here. They care about, getting to heaven, right?
Absolutely. It does depend on the Christian, though. I mean, some Christians believe that God tells them to, take care of humanity. And so I've often said this before, like, as a secular humanist, I care about human well-being. And I'm not looking for sort of a moral, sort of identical morals in the people around me. Right. All I'm looking for is moral compatibility. So if a Christian sort of says, hey, my God commands me to take care of humans, to basically prioritize human well-being, then I can at least have a conversation with them over what that means. And you're right, sort of better society is sort of, what do you mean by better? Like, I've said before, and I think I would use in debates, I don't think I've had a really good chance to use it, but better society for Christians, sometimes I think it means better for Christians, and everybody else isn't really a factor. So a better society, they're talking about, well, what's better for me and the rest of my brethren, rather than what's better for everybody in general. And we see atheists particularly do this a lot. They don't differentiate between their in-group and their out-group. So they'll be a lot more generous to their out-group, like the people that are Christians, the people that are Muslims, whereas Christians are really generous to other Christians, not so much to the other people. They're pretty uncharitable to the people in the out-group. So when I'm talking about a better society, and of course, really, I think ideally you'd have to sort of say, hey, what am I talking about when I say a better society? I'm really saying better for everybody. And if they want to say, hey, but the kingdom of God, it's like, well, that's not society. If you're working for the glory of God, like if you're working for human well-being and you think God's command you to do that, I can have a conversation with you. Okay, what's better for people? Is this program better? Or will, doing food stamps be better for people? What is actually better? That's fine. But when they say, hey, I'm working for the glory of God, and don't care about the well-being because you've got, they have a mission to do this glory of God. Well, at that point, it's like, debating someone's imaginary friend. Like, how am I supposed to say, hey, that won't get you to human well-being? They'll be like, well, that's not important. What's important is the glory of God. And it's sort of like, well, I don't even know how to begin to argue that, because you're basically saying, oh, this is good for the glory of God, which therefore is good for us. And I'm, all of these people are suffering. I care about that. But if you think that that's all part of the plan, where are we supposed to go from there?
Right.
Your imaginary friend is wrong. I don't know how you even begin to argue that.
So this brings up an important point. How important it is to have what the goal or what the argument is in the debate. So like if you were having that debate with a Christian apologist, if you didn't define ahead of time, like what's your metric, then you can't really even have the debate, correct? Am I understanding that right?
No,
like
I don't think so. I think you can...
like what you're going towards, if you don't know that. Like, in other words, if he's arguing this is better and you're arguing this is better, like different goals, that would be a different debate than if you agreed, here's the goal I want. I want this metric. I want the poverty level is here, or nobody has, like if you would agree ahead of time, we want universal healthcare, universal education, and a speed limit of no more than 50 miles an hour, and whatever your things are, then you could argue, oh, well, to get there, Christianity's better, or to get there, Islam is better, to get there, secular humanism is better. But if the question is just what's better, I think you end up in the weeds of how do you define better?
Yeah, but I think all of these ideas are interesting, and debate isn't necessarily to be exactly on the same page. It's to put up those ideas and see, ultimately it isn't for me to convince the opposition that my idea of better is the most rational or reasonable one. That's not what I'm trying to do. Ultimately, it's to convince the audience that my idea of better is the more rational and reasonable one. So in a lot of this, and for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. I debated Jim Bob, who was a complete dumpster fire, like from start to finish. It was a complete nightmare, start to finish. Probably one of the worst debates I have ever seen for sort of interruptions, dumpstering the whole thing, just making it chaotic. Absolutely shocking. And it's amazing that wasn't the worst, but probably one of the worst.
Yeah.
Hey, I think
how can you use the word shocking and chaotic if you don't believe in God?
Right, exactly. So
you can't. You're stealing from Christianity. We invented chaotic.
Right, exactly.
I'm familiar with Jim Bob.
Right. Exactly this kind of stuff. And it was sort of like, is it reasonable to think that is it rational to think that a God exists, right? Like, is that rational? And so because I said that, hey, God may be a social construct, and social constructs exist, like America's a social construct, the law's a social construct, obviously they exist. He's sort of like, well, then I've won the debate. And I'm like, well, if you're going to claim victory because, a concept of a God exists rather than the God, well, I mean, what am I supposed to say to that? But while you can use this sort of word games to claim a victory, I trust that the audience knows what we're debating. Is it rational to think that the actual God exists, not just a social construct that doesn't exist that we call God? And if you want to claim that, well, congratulations. You've just basically won that God's part of your imagination. If you want to claim that as victory, by all means, please do. But where does that actually get you? There's sort of an idea of what winning a debate and not winning a debate, and I think that a lot of people forget that there's sort of a meta debate going on. Like, for instance, if you're trying to win the debate and you're being an absolute prick, like you're being Jim Bob basically, that is a victory in a way where you're showing that somebody can't have a reasonable conversation, that their bad behavior actually works for me. So people are sort of like, well, why do you demand that they don't behave badly? In Sun Tzu's Art of War, there's a phrase, it goes something like, I'm paraphrasing, but when an enemy general is making a mistake, don't stop him, right? Like, don't stop them from making a mistake. And if they want to show through their behavior that they're kind of being unreasonable and, you know, being awful, if they're going to make that mistake, why would I try and stop them?
Yeah, it makes sense to let them sort of let out their own rope, right? They're essentially hanging themselves. It's when you're doing those kind of things, do you see it as still fun and entertaining for you, and you see some value for the audience? Or is there some point in some of those discussions where you think to yourself, yeah, maybe this one was a mistake? Or do you always have fun?
I always have fun. Occasionally I'll get, you know, because I'm human as well. We all get stressed. We all get upset by what some people say. You know, some people are being an absolute jerk. I've thought about anger a lot and stress a lot. I've had very stressful jobs in the past. So, as I said, I used to work in telecommunications, technical support on the phone, and people have been, you know, yelling at me. Part of it, I did high-level complaints. So I'm sort of, it's weird how skills transfer. I'm kind of in a position where I have the skill set to be able to handle somebody that's completely lost the plot. Trust me, like, you know, think AOL or something like that, like high-level complaints would be absolutely ridiculous. But I always do have fun after the fact. And I always like go, okay, well, you know, I got stressed and angry. So part of me sort of says, well, what is it that caused that? What are they saying that is actually making that feeling rise within me? And you know, I usually like investigating that afterwards, or, you know, even during a little bit, but you know, it's hard to focus on other stuff when you're debating it. It is rather rough because so much of it is really engaged. But, you know, I always enjoy it in one way or another. You know, like the amount of times I've sat around and laughed about, you know, a complete dumpster fire is actually incredible. And sometimes it is fun because somebody is making like these shocking arguments, and like it is just, you know, it's actually astounding. It's absurd. And I do have a soft spot for the absurd, you know, when it gets really absurd. When, you know, they're saying, hey, you do believe in God, kind of thing. It's absurd, you know, like it really is. So I must admit I do have fun sometimes, although people have told me in the comments and everything, I completely understand. Like, I can't watch this thing. It is absolutely shocking. It is absolutely terrible. You know, this person acts like a child. I'm like, no, I totally understand. I take no offense whatsoever. Some people find that fun and interesting, a complete dumpster fire of a debate. I totally understand if you don't want to watch it. Like, I don't go, oh, but, you know, support the channel. No, I get you. I totally understand. I'm not adverse to going in a dumpster fire. I'm not backing away. I'm not really afraid of it. I much prefer, you know, a good conversation or a good debate, you know, one where people are being respectful. I much prefer it. I would love to find those every day of the week. Unfortunately, you know, seems to be the age of the dumpster fire on YouTube.
I would imagine that to have that type of debate would be with somebody where you are mostly in agreement with, but you're maybe arguing the details. Like I could think of, I'm not smart enough to give a real example, but imagine you were debating with somebody about an aspect of evolution that it's debatable. Like, you know, I don't know, or, you know, T-Rex ate watermelons and was warm-blooded and had pink feathers or something. I know that's silly, but you know what I'm saying? There's plenty of things we don't know or we haven't answered yet. What origin of life might be one of them, where there's some competing theories. There's some ideas that maybe some of the initial amino acids were delivered by a meteor. There's the hot vent is an idea. Well, okay, the initial self-replicating chemicals started in the hot vents, and it was this, and this. So if you were debating with somebody like that, where your worldviews and you were essentially in agreement, but you're arguing about details, would you find that maybe more pleasurable or less confrontational, but maybe more boring?
I don't think that's necessary. I think that I've debated people whose world views and whose beliefs about the world are vastly different than my own. I've got a real soft spot for there's a person on Modern Day Debate that I debated on Modern Day Debate. Her name's Jen, Church of Entropy. I disagree with almost everything she says. Get along great with her. We've had debates. She's been on my team kind of thing for an evolution. Shape of the Earth debate. I've debated her on evolution. I disagree with her on a lot, a lot. But she's still, I consider her to be a friend, or at least a peer. And, I respect the hell out of her because even though she is completely disagree on everything, I think it's when... I think the dumpster fires occur when tactics are used that are, dishonest or intended to upset the other person or belittle the other person, or sort of the manipulative tactics, like where you're not allowing someone to speak, for instance, when you're yelling over them, or you are straw manning their position, kind of thing. I think it's a sort of direct result of a person using that sort of all the confusion and chaos of a dumpster fire in order to make their debate work. They can't, that they get cornered, or they get they see a good argument and they go, well, I'm just going to shut this thing down. I think a lot of these dumpster fires are by design and not just accidental. And some people absolutely love watching the dumpster fires. They absolutely do. Take, for instance, who's infamous for dumpster fires? Like Darth Dawkins, for instance. He really has this thing. He's a very famous presuppositional apologist because he is probably the worst one out there. And that's high praise because a lot of them are bad. He is the worst one out there. He will just dumpster the whole thing. He will just belittle the person, call them stupid, all of this kind of stuff. And I think it is a reaction to getting arguments presented against you. You don't really have the capacity to argue them. You've got to do something. So let's, absolutely shut the whole thing down by just, calling someone stupid, saying you don't understand, calling them naive, and, you're ignorant of my argument. This kind of stuff is, it's just, to me, getting into that, especially sort of the name calling and, calling people pig snakes. It just shows that they can't actually argue the arguments. They can't actually defend against the arguments. So instead they're going to go to I'll just, rely on my followers to be tribalistic, and then, just be an ass to the other person.
Well, yeah. And everyone will think you won. You destroyed that. You destroyed the atheist.
Right. But here's the thing. I don't think it's just, theists doing that. Some atheists do that as well that I've seen, really do that as well. So I don't think it's, I think that predominantly more it is the theists. I think that they do it more, and definitely the presups do it more. But I've seen plenty of Christians who can, have a reasonable debate. I came across what was his name? Evidence of God was his handle he went by that I debated, and he was perfectly fine, right? He, good argument, good debate, really enjoyed it, no problem whatsoever. So I think that when I do say this, it is generalizations. It doesn't apply to everybody. Sure. Yeah, I want to make that clear.
Do you, when you see an atheist who's going to those tactics that is arguing something you agree with, do you think they go to those tactics because they're just unskilled in presenting the counterfactuals and presenting their case in it? Like maybe they just sort of lose their confidence and they just break down, and then the next thing they're doing is falling into these bad habits. Is that
I think there is a myriad. Yeah, I think there's a myriad of reasons, though. There probably is a myriad of reasons on the Christian side, and there's sort of generalizing. But yeah, sometimes it's a reaction to, a theist makes a particularly good point. Say they come up with the fine-tuning argument, right? Like, I think it's probably the best argument for at least some kind of God out there that I can think of, right? That I don't think it's that strong, or else, you know, I'd probably be a theist. But I think it's the best one that they've got. A lot of people don't know how to handle that one because, you know, it's the watchmaker where everything seems to be in this order that is, you know, working kind of thing. So a lot of people don't know how to handle that, and they'll sort of go, well, that's just stupid. Well, that's not an argument. You know, that's not a refutation against, you know, sort of an ordered universe. That is just saying it's stupid. It doesn't convey anything. But I think there's it really depends on what they're trying to achieve. Some atheists have a debate style where they're trying to shock people out of that mindset. And they do it pretty cleverly. Like Aaron Ra, for instance, he can be very sort of, you know, wake up and smell the roses kind of thing, very, very shockingly blunt about his beliefs and how it should be interpreted. But it does come with some very, very good argumentation, right? Like it really does. So he's not just falling back on, you know, being rude or whatever, but he does want to say, hey, think about what you're saying, and he wants to shock them. I'm not in that camp. I probably wouldn't be as harsh as him, but when I say I wouldn't be, it doesn't mean that's the wrong thing to do.
Right.
This is the thing. There's a lot of people who are doing things. You know, Aaron Ra is definitely doing something right because he definitely has convinced a lot of people. But you know, he doesn't just rest on dumpster. He also has a amazing knowledge of you know, cladistics and genealogies and lineages and things like that. Like his knowledge is excellent as well. I think it is just I think it's just the styles of people and what they're trying to accomplish. I had this conversation with Dr. J, actually. You had him on your show, and you did a debate between him and Bahi, which I think I did review. It's very interesting because he was sort of, well, this is what I want to accomplish. Is it wrong to do this by doing so? No. But it depends what you're trying to accomplish. You know, it depends on why you're going in there. If you want to, you know, shock a Christian into, you know, thinking that what they're doing is wrong, then a certain style may be better for you in order to accomplish that. Right. Which one is right or wrong? I don't know. I you know, I've thought about this a lot. I worry about people taking that sort of really critical against Christians. I personally wouldn't want to scare them into thinking that we're going to dismantle Christianity altogether, kind of thing, because that could have some real negative repercussions if they decide to turn around and say, hey, well, you're trying to destroy us, which, you know, so I don't want to make it seem like, oh, I want to tear the entirety of Christianity down. I don't think they're right. I don't think it's necessarily that good for society, but you know, tearing it down is a long way away from, you know, just sort of saying, hey, we've got to curb the worst excesses of this particular institutions throughout society because they are doing harm to people. There's a big gap there.
Yeah. I still get comments on that video. In fact, I got one just today, and the comment was, this wasn't science, you know, disgusting and terrible and blah, blah, blah. And I've gotten quite a few comments like that from Christians attacking, oh, he was just yelling. He was just name calling. And they obviously are in a camp that doesn't understand what Jay's purpose was or what Jay was doing. Right. Because on the other side, I also today got people reminding me how much they love that. In fact, I was in the comments in a stream, I think it was, or something earlier today, and Maya made a comment about it. Though people remember that, and they love what Jay did. I think his purpose was to point out that there is a point where you cross over from legitimate argument about science to fraud, and he was calling him out as being a fraud. And I didn't do a show. I did an interview with Professor Dave, and we talked about that a little bit. And Professor Dave says, yeah, I responded to that Darwin's black box stuff years ago. It's defeatable. He knows it. I know everybody in the field knows it. It's the person who doesn't understand evolutionary biology and stuff. And so I'm wondering if you think I mean, you kind of already answered there's different styles for everybody and different purposes, but what do you think about that kind of being more aggressive when the reality is the other person is quite often selling snake oil? I mean, they're being, at least in my opinion, sometimes they're just being straight charlatans.
Yeah, well, I think that I don't think Jay did anything wrong whatsoever. I think that his basis wasn't just, hey, I'm going to call names. This is the thing that we've got to understand. He had a rationale behind it, and this is what I love about Jay. He said, okay, well, we publish work. We're both scientists. We both know this. That is the way to get your scientific opinion out there. Instead of publishing this work, Behe is going to print books, which anyone can do, is not peer-reviewed, is not any kind of, system for dealing with false information that's put out there. And he's pointed out that he refuses to actually publish it, kind of through the usual conventional scientific ways. That is sort of one of the pillars of science, is peer review. It has to be, or else anybody could publish anything. But instead he prints a book and then goes on tours and promotes the book and gets Christians to buy it. And then, people are quoting it, and it's not science. What he put in that book is not science, but he's parading it around as science. And Behe, as a scientist, should know better. It wasn't that he was just going, oh, you're a fraud because your ideas are wrong. No, absolutely not. He's basically saying that because he's putting out a rationale that, as a scientist, this is not the correct way to get your scientific ideas accepted. Yeah, it is not via popular opinion of putting out a book and getting people out in the wild like myself, non-scientists, to support it. That is not the way you get scientific ideas approved. And he knows that. So I think that this kind of stuff, it is harsh, but as long as you can present an argument for it, and I think Jay did very well, and sort of getting people to understand that a scientist like Behe, all scientists understand this, right? All scientists know that you don't get your work respected in science or accepted by scientific institutions by publishing a book and getting, public opinion to support the book and then pushing that upon university. Right. That is not how you do that. And every scientist knows that. What you do is you publish in a reputable journal, have it peer reviewed by other experts in the field, and that's how it gets accepted into the scientific institutions. So I think he was quite right in doing so. And we see this all the time from especially young Earth creationists, all the time. They will not publish in reputable journals. Instead, they publish, in some other journal, Creation Institute stuff, or they'll go and print a book and then act like that is now the new science. And through public opinion and promotion by religious bodies, they're going to get that as the accepted science within institutes. That is not how science works at all. And Jay was quite right for pointing that out. And quite right for pointing out that Behe knows that.
Yeah. So he knows it. I think James Tour and other guys, these big popular guys, they know what the critique is, and if they're, they who knows, they might have faith and really believe, but they know what they're doing wrong. At least they know the right process. Do you have a feeling, and you don't have to name any particular person, but when it comes to science, history about Christianity, like things about the resurrection and archaeological stuff, like Exodus is a real thing because I went on some digs and I have a PhD and I think Moses is a real guy and blah, blah, blah. Would you put most of those guys into the camp of truly naive and deceived, and they really just are blind to what they're doing? Or would you mix some of those into the camp of, hey, these guys know what they're doing, they've got the degrees, so they've gone to school and university, they understand, and they're monetizing the bullshit by taking advantage of gullible people, and they know it?
So I would probably believe what they say they believe, right? There's no real way to look inside people's minds and go, oh, they don't believe this kind of thing. And we get, as I mentioned, we get presuppositional apologetics doing the same. No, you do believe in God, you're just suppressing it in your own righteousness. It's like, come on now, you can't tell what somebody believes, like, come on, seriously. But so usually I think that a lot of them are just, they really do believe, but then you get sort of evidence that somebody doesn't and they're doing the wrong thing. I think that there's some more suspicious than others. There's some young earth creationist scientists that have published, under the evolutionary and old earth paradigm and then suddenly switched kind of thing. It's a bit suspicious. You can get very cynical about that. But I think for a majority of them, they sincerely believe it. I don't agree with them, but I think they sincerely believe it. Religion is a funny thing. It can make you believe the most ridiculous things. And if you're a religious person and don't believe me, look at the next religion over. Like look at Scientology or the Mormonism. If you don't believe me, look at any other religion and you'll go, oh, those are some silly beliefs. Yours are probably some silly beliefs as well. Yeah.
Can I ask you about that? I want to ask you about that because
can I stop you is the better question.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could leave. You could just leave. You couldn't stop me. I just talked to myself.
That's true.
So what you just said in a weird coincidence is just something I just released that me and Jay did together. And it was exactly those two things, Scientology and Mormonism, being laughed at. Openly mocking. So it's Melissa Doherty, who's a big anti-cult. She went through Frank Turek's cross-examined hyper apologetic school and she's getting her degree. And she knows, she's out she's trying to save the world from New Age and cults and all that. And she had on her show Lindsay Medenwalt, who wrote a book called a bridge building apologetics. So she's really sweet. I interviewed her for my show and I mean, like super, super sweet. Like if you're ever in Indiana traveling, you can spend the night, come, my husband and I will be happy to feed you dinner and let you sleep on the couch. And I'm thinking,
oh, that's really nice.
Well, I'm thinking I could be a serial killer. You don't know me. I don't think
true. Yeah.
I don't think it's really, I'm not going to accuse her of being disingenuous, but I actually don't think it's really nice. I think it's an act because and they have kids. No sane person would invite a total stranger to spend the night at their house that they've never met. That's not rational. So I think she knows nobody's going to take her up on it, and it's virtual signing. Now I know that's cynical, but I'm a cynical person. That's my take. Is it? Yeah. Because
if you are like we're talking about psychopaths earlier, if you're a psychopath, you're going to know that she's going to tell people that you're going to be there. You'll inevitably be caught, kind of thing. I don't think it's as dangerous as you're making out because she's going to be people are going to know you're there.
Maybe I'm just a bore.
But maybe you could have other issues. Maybe you could have mental health problems. We don't know. Who knows that? I get what you're saying, though. I really do.
Yeah. I'm just cynical. She is a very nice person. I will say that. I want to make that clear. I'm not. Yeah. That's just my cynicism coming out. But her and Lindsay bring up. They're talking about Scientology, and they sort of briefly mention Mormonism because they play some South Park clips. And they're literally laughing. Now, just to tell the whole story here, Lindsay commented on my video in the comments and said, I don't really know that I was mocking them. I was more smiling. But there was a place where she's genuinely laughing, and for good reason. South Park's funny. South Park's funny, and Scientology and Mormonism are ridiculous beliefs. They're silly. And so Jay and I went through every claim they made. Scientology gives free acting classes to try to lure people into the cult. So I played a little clip of Christians having acting classes for children, right? It's the same fucking thing. Scientology does these marriage classes. So I played a clip of a church having a well-produced video, come to our marriage classes. Scientology, they ask a lot of questions. I show a clip of Melissa at an event some new agey or Christian thing, asking a bunch of questions. That's what she does. She asks questions. So everything that they mocked, and they mocked Thetans, of course. And I go, okay. Then I played some clips of some Christians talking about demons and demon possession and demon. It's the same, right? It's the same fucking thing. And so in the comment, I said to Lindsay, I go, you are mocking these people, which, you know, I understand why, but you're not seeing that your beliefs are identical. Like your criticism applies to you. It's maybe a type. So you could say, yes, Thetans are different from demons. Okay, they're different.
Yeah, but there's Christians like so when we're talking about what Christians believe, we have to be careful that we're talking about specific Christians, because there's some Christians that don't believe in demons, you know, like they just don't believe in that stuff. You will get, you know, and look, Catholics, you know, there's Catholics that believe that in transubstantiation, that the wafer turns into the flesh of Christ and the wine into the blood. But others are like, no, that's ridiculous. You know, like it's just sort of a ceremonial thing, and they get it, you know. So it's important when we're saying this that she actually does believe in demons and stuff. I don't know her at all, so I don't know her beliefs on that. But I suppose at a base level, you know, even if she just believes in a god, you're really talking about some disembodied mind that is the creator of the universe. To me, that's just as ridiculous as a galactic overlord that destroys an alien race by putting them in volcanoes and earth and, you know, throwing nuclear bombs on them. To me, they're about the same level of ridiculousness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, each could be true. Like if there could be a god, there could be Scientology could be true, or
overlord,
or you know, lizard aliens in the middle. As long as it's logically internally consistent, anything could be possible, right? There could be. You know, I mean, I might be God. Yeah, I'm just here testing.
I mean, some things are a bit more suspicious than others. Like, you know, a science fiction writer happens to get a vision about, you know, this science fiction galactic overlord. You know, it just is a bit convenient, but. Yeah, you're right. Like, there's nothing logically saying that's not possible, just as there's nothing logically saying that a god isn't possible. It's just there's no reason to think it is actually true.
Do you see? So, like, obviously, my back and forth with Lindsay and in my video isn't quote a debate, but it sort of operates like a debate. Like I'm presenting an argument against your argument. So I'm kind of debating you, but you're not there.
This is one of my pet peeves, actually. People that call debates things that aren't just conversations or just sort of on the moment arguments. So a lot of people and a lot of theists, I've noticed, some atheists, but they run this thing where they'll have people call in, say, to their call-in show, and they'll say, oh, I debate people on this. No, you don't. Like, a debate is where you have a moderated, structured, even if it's an informal debate, it's still moderated and structured. And essentially what you're doing is allowing both people time to speak. You're trying to keep it fair. You know, your call-in show doesn't have that. You mute the person whenever you want. So it really annoys me when people like put in the thing, oh, I debated these atheists. And it's like, no, you didn't. You had a call-in show. Like, I feel like it's clickbaity. And I think it really, it just devalues what a debate is. And that's a equal exchange of ideas on an even playing field. Like, even an informal debate, it should have an even playing field where, you know, you have time to speak, or at least, you know, time to make your case. They have time to make your case. I think it really does devalue the idea of a debate to say, oh, I rocked up in this, you know, random Google call or Google Hangout and there was a debate. You know, it's like, no, that's not really a debate. Like, come on now, that's just a conversation or an argument or something.
Yeah.
You know, if people say use it colloquially, I get it. I totally get it. That doesn't annoy me. It's when it's put in the thumbnail. I suppose part of it is that I want more debates. I don't want to be a debate bro and go, you know, oh, well, if you think that, then debate me, bro, kind of thing. You know, that's not really what I'm about. But at the same time, I do want to get more debates. And you have people like Standing for Truth who will not debate me. Like, he just won't. I've asked multiple times. He's written a book on endogenous retroviruses, which I found fascinating. I thought that was a fascinating subject, so I looked into that a lot. He will not debate me. Absolutely not. Doesn't have the time, doesn't want to, doesn't do, he just has every excuse under the sun. But, he claims to sort of be an expert on them because he wrote a book on them kind of thing on Amazon, self-published kind of thing. But if I ever go to a room there and, he's obviously got control over the room, he'll advertise it on his channel as, oh, I debated Mark Reed. And it's like, no, you didn't. Yeah. No, you didn't. I just stepped into a room with no prep, nothing, under my belt. And we just had a conversation and disagreed on a few things. That is not having a debate. But, there's people that, they won't go out of their rooms. They won't actually have a fair meeting of minds, be able to present your side and I present my side and really have a conversation about it, even if we completely disagree, where both sides can make their case. And, it's not like those dumpster fires where someone's being shouted down by another person. It really annoys me when sort of mostly theists are going, oh, well, I debate. And it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Yeah, I only watched this because I had done a recording with a Christian apologist fan who was on Jubilee with Alex O'Connor. So I kind of was curious about it. I'd never seen Jubilee before, and then I watched it. And I think that, to me, the reason I bring it up is like it's the epitome of the opposite of what you want to do, because not only is it these short things that there's 20 people standing around with red flags, and you maybe can talk for 30 seconds or a minute, and then they raise the red flags, and then you're kicked off, and then somebody else runs to the chair. It's complete spectacle. Nothing's gained by it. I guess people find it entertaining. I found it completely obnoxious and completely worthless, other than I made a response video about it. But do you see that as, like the call-in shows, as appealing to people's, it's why we eat ice cream, right? It appeals to some easy pleasure. Like it's like watching soap operas or some other silly show.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with entertainment. I think, as far as entertainment goes, you could be doing a lot worse than watching, a call-in show for atheism or theism or something like that. Occasionally you do have good ideas brought up. Did you get, just as an aside, just a bit of a tangent, did you get copyright flagged for that O'Connor thing when you did your response? Because I sure as hell did. I got my live stream taken down for daring to comment and criticize on that one. Jubilee's notorious for being absolutely terrible about copyright.
No, maybe I'm too small, or maybe I was using. You probably, this is why I found the whole thing so stupid and ridiculous. My response video was critiquing Than's running ability. So I had intercut Olympic trainers teaching people how to run and then showing him stumble in running. Oh, okay. So it wasn't about the debate. It was about making fun of Than.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so that's probably why.
Yeah. But I think that sort of putting Alex O'Connor surrounded by, 20 just average Christians, and it's kind of like putting Mike Tyson in a ring with, 20 sort of, children, basically. It's not really a fair fight, especially when you expect them to come on one-on-one kind of thing, or 20 average people and they can only, attack him one at a time. Alex O'Connor, I've said before, I think that if his trajectory keeps going the way he's going, he'll be one of the great thinkers of our time, like Noam Chomsky or, Bertrand Russell, or any of these huge people that, really, really do make a splash with their thoughts and ideas. And I really like where he's coming from. So putting him against just sort of average people, it seems a little unfair. Although I saw one with Michael Knowles where some of the people absolutely flogged him, like got him absolutely stuck. So I think it can have benefits, but really you're looking at, I mean, Alex O'Connor's not going to be stumped by a bunch of normal people. Apparently, Michael Knowles is, though. Like Michael Knowles really got the brunt of that one. So I think it really does sort out who has actually thought deeply about the subject they're coming on for, and who has just been doing surface level arguments that, you know, anybody on the street can dismantle. So I think it does have some use there, but you know, I would much rather see, you know, Alex O'Connor go up against, you know, David Wood or somebody like that. You know, somebody who can actually make an argument.
Yeah. What do you think the issue is with people who see bad arguments but think they're good arguments? Let me give you an example. In that Alex O'Connor thing, there was a woman who came up and she said, well, I'm not going to say I like your show because I don't know who you are, but let me tell you about Psalm 22, because this prophesied about Jesus. He was pierced for our sins, right, and blah, blah, blah. So that anybody that's even remotely understands that argument, the prophesy arguments and stuff, it has at least understood a little bit about the Hebrew, and they know that the word pierce doesn't appear in the text, right? So she doesn't know that, and the audience that hears her thinks, oh, score one for the Christians, you know? What's going on? Is it just lack of education? Is it lack of interest? Because we both know there's tons of people out there that heard that woman say that to Alex O'Connor thinking she made a point. Now, granted, if you have a PhD in Hebrew and you think the word pierce does appear or is legitimate, okay, fine. But that would be like an hour discussion among seasoned scholars. And it still maybe not would be resolved, but at least you could argue legitimately. What is it about us is it just like rooting for a sports team? Like somebody hear her say that and says, woohoo, you know, it's go Steelers or go 49ers. Is that all it really is at the end of the day?
I mean, you're really talking about tribalism, and that can happen everywhere. You know, like an atheist can give a bad response to a question. We're quite capable of it. I've seen it before. I've probably given some bad responses myself. And, you know, if atheists just go, woohoo, are we doing the same? I think the same could be leveraged against us. Yeah, possibly. But I think that religion in particular, it not only exacerbates that tribalism, but it really does instill a sort of, you know, confirmation bias sort of mentality. You know, I mean, when people say, hey, I've seen miracles, I've found my car keys kind of thing, or when they're sort of using these arguments that you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I once had somebody tell me that sort of prayer was like Amazon, like you pray for it and then you get it delivered kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, but what about all the people not praying? They still get good things happening to them. And he really didn't understand why that fell down, which was weird, because I said, you know, sometimes you don't pray for stuff and get it as well. So if, you know, people don't pray, get stuff, you pray, get stuff, then why pray? Because it seems to happen at the same rate, whether you do or not. You know, it is this confirmation bias. We see this in a lot of the fallacies that they make. In that one, it's called the Texas sharpshooter, for instance. You count all the hits and ignore all the misses kind of thing. So we know that the human mind has a propensity to these flawed ways of thinking. Like if we believe something is true, we will find evidence for it. You know, our confirmation bias will lead us towards there. And I've often said that science and apologetics, they kind of work in opposite ways. And I'll explain what I mean. Like science, essentially what you're doing is you're looking at the world around you and then trying to follow that to wherever conclusion it leads. Apologetics is you've got the conclusion first, right? You've got where it should lead, and then you look around to try and find what leads you to that conclusion. So in a way, that apologetics is sort of going, well, it has to lead to this conclusion. I think there's a lot of that, you know, going around at the moment. It may just be because I've engaged with a lot of precepts at the moment who literally go, well, you start with the truth of God, right? You start with that being true, that God is responsible for morality or
you can't even use logic until you've
logic or what's the word I'm thinking of? It's like intelligibility. That's it. The God's responsible for anything being understandable at all. And then you assume that first, and then you find all the reasons to lead you to that kind of thing. So that kind of thinking we know is flawed thinking. Like, we know that if we say, hey, I want to get to this conclusion, you will find all of the things to get you there. So I think a lot of it is like that. They have the conclusion first, and then they're putting something out there to say, well, of course, finding my car keys is a miracle. You know, it leads to God. That's the evidence that I've got. So I think it is just a misunderstanding, or not a misunderstanding, but they're employing a kind of logic that does not actually, you know, reliably get you to the truth. Because if you apply that to other things, like if I, you know, believe that Scientology is true first, then I will absolutely be able to find all the stuff to get me to Scientology. You know, that is what confirmation bias does. And science is specifically designed to try and eliminate that, because you're not trying to get to the hypothesis, you're trying to falsify the hypothesis. And that's really important. You're trying to prove you wrong, basically. And whatever you cannot prove wrong is accepted as most likely or almost certainly to be true. But it is that process of falsification that makes it so strong, because you can't have confirmation bias.
This reminds me of a response video I did to something that Wes Huff said. And I want to ask you your opinion on what do you think's going on after I explain the story in a nutshell.
Sure.
I heard Wes Huff say, he was on Ruslan, and he's like, I had a miracle. So he's kind of describing the spark that led him down the path of loving Jesus and going to school, right?
Yeah.
So this is his basic story. At 11 years old, one day, just like this, I couldn't move. Like, it happened really fast.
Okay.
I went to the hospital and blah, blah, blah. The doctors told me that I'll likely never walk again. I'll probably spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. And then within a few weeks, I was up. And then, you know, a month later, I was perfectly normal. This is a miracle. There's no way to explain it. The doctors couldn't explain it. And this is part of his testimony. When I did a response video to that, I was curious. And sure enough, he's been talking about this. It's on his website. He's talked about it on other channels. So I went and researched it. Okay. He had something called transmucular myelitis, I think. And it's an acute version. So this happens to kids where they're swelling in the spine. The swelling cuts off the nerves and they can't walk. And so I went and listened to some research doctors talking about this thing. And I found one that was out of Johns Hopkins, and he's giving a lecture on the research of it. And it turns out that for all of this, when this happens across the board, the recovery rate is like in the high 90s when it happens, but it's worse when it happens to a kid. So what happened to Wes is the worst case. 11, 12, 13 years old. The recovery rate's only about 2/3. So a roughly 2/3 of children that they literally can't walk, like they're paralyzed. So I looked at a chart. There's actually a few percent that just die, like it shuts down respiratory and that people they die. Then there's a small percent that like never walk again. Then there's a percent that do walk again, but they need help and they don't fully recover. And roughly 2/3 have little to zero lasting effects. So there was a higher chance that he would recover completely than flipping a coin heads. I mean, what Christian would say, if I flip a coin and say, if it comes up heads, it's a miracle. Oh, if it came up heads, it's a miracle. Nobody would say that. But yet he can go around publicly talking about how this amazing miracle happened when 2/3 of 11-year-old boys fully recover. Because why? So I listened to one of the interviews he did was with Eric Manning, who's a literalist fundy. And Eric actually said to him in the interview, wow, there's no cure for this. There's nothing. So when I take it, when you went to the hospital, the doctors didn't even do anything, right? Like there was no treatment. And he says, no, they gave me,
there definitely was treatment. Yeah.
Of course there was. The treatment is, so I went and watched another video of a guy helping people pass their medical exam so I could see the chart on the whiteboard. And it's like this high, very powerful steroid is given right away. And in fact, I think part of the rate of recovery probably depends on how quickly you get medical attention. And these very powerful steroids are like shot into the affected area. And if you get the swelling under control, then you end up being fine. So Wes says to Eric, I got steroids. It's kind of like an aside. Well, yeah, they gave me steroids. And then they continue the conversation as if it's still a complete miracle without question. And so my question, I know this is a long preamble. My question to you is, what is going on there? It's hard. I don't want to call Wes a liar, although I probably think he's lying. But if I'm going to be gracious to him, it's like, no, he's just never looked at it. But how do you not look at this happen to you how do you never investigate this major event in your life?
Yeah, but he's got the reason why he could walk again already down, right? He's already basically got that in his head that when something happens that is wonderful and, completely unexpected and wonderful, then that is a miracle. So he's got that confirmation first. Like he's already said, hey, I'm going to attribute all of these things. And that's where confirmation bias kicks in. So we have this thing that occurs. He doesn't look at all of the extraneous stuff. And I might add, like a lot of theists, they'll hear a doctor say, hey, look, you probably won't walk again kind of thing. And doctors err on the side of a bad prognosis.
Sure.
Right. So doctors generally, they want to say, hey, you'll probably be fine. Right. You'll probably have very little to no lasting effects from this kind of thing, because if they're wrong, it is such a shock to the patient, the family. And stuff.
Yes, it's their mental health is hurt.
Right. So doctors generally will make a prognosis that leans towards the worst case scenario, so the patient is prepared if it happens. It doesn't mean that they're going to say, oh, well, you're certainly going to die. No, nothing like that. But they will say, hey, this could have these effects, and it's important to be aware that you may be affected for life, and it does have there is a possibility that you can die. And they probably said that to him, and then there's no effects, and he goes, well, it's a miracle, because anything that in between a outcome where something bad can happen and something good happens, and the good is amazing, that's a miracle for him. So he doesn't look at it any further. He just goes, well, that confirms what I knew already. I mean, that's confirmation bias. We do that all the time. We will have a sincere belief about something. Something will happen. We'll go, oh, well, that was the, whatever it is happening. Yeah. And it is a fault in humans that we do this. Like we all kind of do it. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't comment on his state, but that's probably what I would guess.
Yeah. So here's another aspect of the story. He testifies that the doctors were amazed, and I've heard this a million times in Christian circles. He testifies the doctors were amazed. They didn't have an answer, blah, blah, blah. So when I did my response video, I said, look, unless Canadian doctors are just quacks, they couldn't have said that. Like, this is probably a false memory of an 11-year-old. Maybe the doctor said something encouraging, but I don't think any medical professional that's responsible is going to tell an 11-year-old kid, yeah, it's a miracle. We have no idea how this happened. Of course not. When they know darn well what the statistics are. Like they might say something like, I don't know. I mean, be very happy. Or if he knew he was a Christian, and the doctor might say, thank God, this was a great, beautiful thing. I'm happy you've recovered. Sure. But
I doubt it, though.
Yeah, no, I doubt it too. But I could see that. So there's. Back when I was a Christian, there was a pastor who dove into the ocean in California. I used to live in Southern California, and he cracks his neck. So it's the same story of he's probably never going to walk again. In fact, he's probably going to be a paraplegic.
Well, but people have recovered from that.
Of course. But there's a video of him going through the stages of physical recovery. And I give him a lot of credit, because at the end of the video,
that's rough. Yeah.
It was a very rough thing. He worked his butt off. At the end of the video, he says, I thank God for my recovery, but at the hands of all these doctors, I thank the doctors. The staff here is the best staff. and I got the best care. So he's at least being
yeah.
somewhat realistic, right? So I don't fault him for saying thank you, Jesus, but he was honest that he got there because the staff was dedicated, knowledgeable. He had like one of the best teams in California to help him. So that's at least honest. Now, but he could have easily, you know, a year or two later when he was walking, he could have easily said what Wes Huff says. He could have easily said, and in fact, it would have been more believable because the recovery rate from, I think,
a lot smaller.
Yeah, the recovery rate's a lot smaller, and he literally like it took a year of therapy even to get out of his wheelchair, kind of thing. It was very horrific accident. So,
well, how old was Wes Huff when this happened?
11 or 12.
Okay. So there's another factor to consider, that it's not only the doctor in this scenario that's telling him what is happening here. There's also probably family and friends and all these other people around who are, you know, probably very Christian.
Yeah. It's called Miracle Day. He has a name for the day that he walked. His family still celebrates it. It's Miracle Day.
Oh dear. Well, yeah, and this is a problem because the doctor may go, hey, he's making a really speedy recovery. It's really fantastic. We did not expect that. And his mother may relay to him something like, the doctors could not figure out what happened. It's miraculous. It's a miracle. And the doctors are completely stunned and flabbergasted as to how you managed to ever walk again, kind of thing. And that is sort of that chain of misunderstanding that, you know, he gets told that and goes, oh, well, it is a miracle. And you know, that's not what the doctor said. It just said that the recovery was quite speedy, and he was kind of amazed at how resilient this boy was. He's not saying we have no idea how this happened. It's just unusual in some way. And it could have been an unusually fast recovery. That doesn't make it a miracle. We do have people that bounce back from things and people that don't. You know, some people are laid low by something that another person heals very fast. And children are usually pretty resilient. They do bounce back pretty fast.
Yeah. I think there's probably some aspect of his memories actually somewhat changed.
Yeah.
Well, come on. When you're 11 years old, you don't remember
11
everything.
years old. Yeah. I don't remember everything about being 11.
But that's part of my complaint, though. He's now a grown man. And here's my other part of my complaint is he's using that story to monetize his Christianity. So he was using that story on a Ruslan convention thing where the tickets are hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and he's a featured speaker. So he used that story to sell a Christian product. And to me, that's where it crosses to charlatan, to being this, because you're using what's obviously a lie to sell something. And I'm not going to let him off the hook. Yeah, maybe he's misremembering, but he's a grown adult. All he's got to do is 5 minutes of Google research and he would know it's not a miracle.
Right. Well, I don't have a problem with calling him out, right? It's just what we've got to understand about what the environment that Christians are in is that when they relay a story like this, oh, well, the doctors were amazed how fast, everybody around them in their circle, all the people they know will be telling them how much of a miracle it is, you know, that it is actually a miracle from God. And, you know, it's not entirely their fault. Don't get me wrong. I think he definitely bears the burden of, if it's raised with him or, you know, something sent to him, he really should look at that disease and make sure that he is actually relaying an accurate description of its survival rate and its, you know, its rate of impairment and things. Don't get me wrong. It's calling him out, all good on. It's just that, you know, I'll relay you a story. I once met this guy who was a Christian. He was sort of like, you know, what's more probable for the start of the universe, you know, a God or just natural things? And I'm like, well, just natural. And he's sort of like, why? And I'm like, well, we've seen natural things. I've never seen a God, right? Like, so that automatically makes it more probable as far as induction goes. And he said, well, yeah, but I've seen miracles. And I'm like, what miracles have you seen? And he's like, well, at my church, they managed to like make somebody's leg the same length kind of thing. And I'm like, oh no, that's like a common
charlatan thing.
Right. That is a charlatan thing from the 50s, you know, that is it. And he's like, oh no, I know there is those people doing that, but not my church. That
Right.
was actually a real one. And I'm like, oh no, like you've just been suckered by literally the oldest trick in the book. But the point was that everybody around him, you know, like he's saying, oh, but you know, my uncle that I knew, he wouldn't lie to me, and he gets to, you know, see it directly. And then there's the pastor, and he wouldn't lie, and just all of this. Everybody agrees that it's a miracle, and it's like, oh no,
Yeah.
like we've got a flaw in thinking there, that it's reinforced by the people around you. That's all you hear. You never hear people coming up to you going, hey, that, you know, disease that you had, it's got a 66% chance of getting your outcome. What the hell, man? That's not a miracle. That's 2/3 possibility just, you know, coming in there, especially if you're a healthy, active young person, you know.
Yeah. Recovery is the expectation, not the exception.
Right.
Well, so here's a weird thing. Let me tell you what happened to me. So I was on a missions trip to Northern Ireland, and I was a high school, like a lay leader to the high school group. Yeah. And they had a healing ministry there called HOTS, I think, Healing on the Streets. And so we'd go out. Part of our training was to go out, and the guy that led that, who's actually now in the States now, does the leg thing. So we're there, and they do the leg thing to a bunch of the kids, and then another one of the adult leaders gets on the chair, and she's all excited, and she's like, wow, I can't believe this is amazing. So I'm like, okay, I'll volunteer. So they put me on the chair, and of course my feet aren't exactly the same length, and they manipulate, and later I actually felt better. So I'm thinking to myself, there's no possible way we all had different length legs. That didn't, like, I'm not buying that one. I'm gullible, but I'm not that gullible.
Right.
So, but what I did is I justified it in my head as, oh, I bet what happened was my hips were out of alignment, and he prayed and my hips went back in alignment, like a chiropractor, because I do feel better. Yeah. So I justified it to myself. I justified it to myself that it was really a move of God and the Holy Spirit, even though I wasn't willing to believe my legs were different lengths.
Right.
So yeah, I'm just telling on myself here. I get it. Like, I get how your mind will look for a way.
And don't get me wrong, Michael. I wasn't like, oh, this person is so stupid or anything like that. It's more just, oh, we've got a case of confirmation bias and sort of group peer pressured kind of thinking, you know, like if everybody's thinking, and you know, that isn't something that is unusual for humans. That's definitely a failing of ours. You know, it's just the way that our minds work, which is why I love, you know, logic and philosophy and rationality so much. It's to try and get around those inherent failures in our thinking that we all do. You know, there's no sort of, there shouldn't be any shame attached to it, because we all do this and think in certain ways that are irrational and illogical. It's just a, you know, case that we're flawed thinkers.
Yeah. We definitely have the problem that we deceive ourselves and we don't know we've deceived ourselves. And then that it's hard to see, you know, we're blind to our blinders are blinding us to the fact we have blinders on. How do you see it? Do you think there's some ways when you're doing a debate and doing a talk that you can help the audience do the thing? So like let's say we were arguing about, let's say we were debating the West Huff miracle with a true believer of the West Huff miracle. And we wouldn't in a debate, we wouldn't be able to show an hour of slides and a video of a lecture from Johns Hopkins, which I did for my research for my response video. It took me several hours, but I distilled it down into, you know, to nuggets. Do you think that's the answer and people get it? And are debates just inherently flawed unless they're very long and structured and have, you know, like you have, you know, if you're going to make a claim, you better have all the papers and you better have the citations, and there's a crew of 10 people in the back room, you know, typing away, checking, and then they can stop at any moment and say, know what, you just, you know, the paper you're citing has been overthrown or so forth.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's always a problem, not being able to check sources, really investigate, do all of that kind of thing in a debate. Like, totally get it. I think the key is heuristics for something like that. Like, so heuristics are just sort of a shortcut of how we get from one sort of way of thinking to another. I have to really work on it. I got a case of throwing out fallacies without actually explaining what they are. So I do have to work on that, instead of saying, hey, it's an appeal to ignorance, saying, hey, if, I don't know something, your explanation of it doesn't actually have any more merit. You've got to show that's the explanation, not that I don't know it. You've got to support your own argument, sort of that stuff. But heuristics that can be used are things like analogy, right? So if you're sort of saying, hey, if a Jehovah's Witness said that, or somebody else, like a person from Islam said that they had a cough and then it was cured by miracle, would you believe that? Like we can do these shortcuts. So analogies, sort of appealing to logical thought, or there's sort of something called a reductio ad absurdum. And I'll be good and I'll explain what it is. It's basically when you take an argument, and it's an internal critique. So you're basically taking an argument, you're changing it in some way so it's the same argument. Like, for instance, an example of that is putting a contrary in, right? Like, so putting something else in the argument, and if it works exactly the same, then it's a contradiction. So if you're basically going, well, the Christian God is the only true God because he performed miracles, if you said, well, but using that same argument, I could put Allah or Buddha or any of these other gods in there and it would work exactly the same, then we've got a contradiction there because both can't be true. And so therefore you've made the argument absurd because everything can work in there. Any God could work in there. And obviously there can't be, Yahweh and Thor and Zeus and Buddha and all these other ones. So that's a way we can sort of go, okay, that's, a problem. Another way is sort of techniques like, I remember Amy Newman, who's just an amazing person. I love Amy Newman. Awesome person. She sort of said we're merchants of doubt. Like, we don't have to win a debate. We don't have to convince people. But the important thing is that we say, hey, look at your thinking. That like, get people along that road to deconstruction. Like, what do I actually know? Is the stuff that I've been taught really what I know, or is it just been imparted upon me? And, I've been told this. And that's the important part. Things like cognitive dissonance is incredibly powerful. So if you can get them to agree to two ideas and they're conflicting, that's where cognitive dissonance starts. So cognitive dissonance is basically holding two ideas in your head that are that contradict one another. It causes no end of problems for your brain because it knows it's contradictory. So if you think God is omnibenevolent and God ordered the deaths of all the Amalekites, that's a problem, right? Like, if you think God is goodness and justice personified, and he, unalived a whole bunch of kids and tribes and things like that, those are two ideas they can't really sit very comfortably in the head. The way around that is you find some kind of rationale, some kind of apologetics to say, hey, but they were doing this, and that's what we do. We say, hey, this can't be true because these two ideas, they don't work together. That's basically the problem of evil. The idea that God is all good and loving and caring, and God sent viruses to absolutely torment, malaria to torment us. Those two ideas don't fit together. So essentially that's what we're doing. We're saying, hey, you hold these two ideas, how do they work together?
And to answer that is essentially the seed or the birth of modern apologetics, right?
Right.
That they work very, like, when you hear William Lane Craig say, the real victims in that, what you're talking about, Mark, was actually the Israeli soldiers who had to suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome from killing babies. And I'm not making a joke here. That was what he actually told Alex O'Connor.
Yeah.
So I want to give you an example and ask you what you think's kind of going on, because you'll get it when I give the example. When I was a young Earth creationist, somebody challenged me on it and gave me Hugh Ross. And so I read Hugh Ross's book. For those that don't know, he's a Christian astrophysicist. And I thought, okay, this sort of makes sense to me. But I wasn't fully convinced until I started thinking about Hawaii, because I lived in Hawaii at the time. And Hawaii, if anyone knows the basics, it's as the continental plate goes over a hot spot, it makes islands, and Kauai has rivers. You can ride a boat on a river. It's got these there's a place called the Grand Canyon of the Pacific on Kauai, whereas the Big Island's still growing. It's almost no beaches. The island's still growing bigger, and there's actually a seamount that's going to pop over the surface in maybe 10,000 years, and maybe in 1,000,000 years it'll connect with the Big Island. Where I lived, Maui is 2 volcanoes, and they're clearly different. Haleakala erupted in the 18th century, and I've hiked through the crater. It's like being on the moon. You can tell it's a fresh lava flow, where the West Maui Mountains are way, way, way eroded. You don't hike up. Nobody goes hiking up there because it's just it's a rainforest. So in my mind as a Christian and as a young earth creationist, I said to myself, the evidence is obvious that either one of two things is true. The earth is old because Hawaii took millions of years. I can see that. Or God made it this, like he made it old, and I wasn't willing to accept that. So my question to you is, what's going on in the minds of people who still continue to argue, no, the earth is 6,000 years old, but not because God made Maui that way? They still try to argue the Grand Canyon could have been made really fast with a lot of water, not that God made the Grand Canyon old. Is my question clear there? I know some people get to where I got. Like, I could have easily said, I still believe in young earth, but God made it look old. I could have landed there and that's logically consistent, but I didn't. I was still a theistic evolutionary believer in old earth. So I guess my question is a little complicated here, but it's kind of like, what do you think or see as the sort of the tipping point where somebody just gives up the ghost and says, yeah, okay, I'm going to land on this more logical camp, but I'm still going to keep it in my Christian framework?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I think it varies from person to person. I think that your question about what keeps a person still believing is that Christianity is set up to sort of squash doubt and have faith. And I mean faith in sort of not the evidence of stuff faith, but really the faith as in, I don't need evidence and I'm just going to believe the conclusion first. And I really want to point to this idea because the young earth creationists especially, they have the conclusion first, right? That God is the cause of all things, and that is their conclusion, and then they're working to find the evidence to fit with that. So I think that the idea that God created Earth as being old, I've heard that before. It raises some questions about, hey, is God being deceptive? Is God trying to fool us? Are we being tricked by God? Is a question, but a lot of people don't. They just say, hey, that's the case. Adam was created at the age of 27, so God could create the Earth at the age of 4-point-something million years, and that's what he did, kind of thing, or 4.6 billion. I don't think it is that. I think it is that they have their conclusion, and everything fits to that conclusion for the reasons I was discussing. You see it really evidently with Answers in Genesis and the Creation Ministry International and things like that. The scientific, they want to believe they're scientific, but they're not. Institutions that promote intelligent design or young earth creationism, as it's known. They have a statement of what we're about as we believe that everything comes from God and work to uncover the truth of that. And to me, it is so blatantly obvious, rather, when you look at the mission statements of scientific institutions, like real ones, they've got like, we examine the world around us and try to find the truth of what they're basically saying, hey, we look around us and we get our scientific truth from that. But the really strange thing is that answers in Genesis, they say they have the truth first, and then they find the evidence to actually support it. I mean, I'm of course paraphrasing, but that's essentially what they say. They're sort of admitting outright that they are, they've got a belief first and foremost, and then they're trying to find the evidence to match it. So when encountered with something like your example, where, well, obviously these things are older than 6,000 years, and there's the amount of evidence that the Earth is older than 6,000 is amazing. They will find some kind of explanation that fits with their worldview, even though it's not supported at all by any kind of scientific inquiry or any kind of evidence. But that's enough for them, because they don't necessarily require evidence if they're going to have faith in that. So it's kind of like the way that they work. Science basically works by dropping all assumptions, observing the world around you, coming up with a hypothesis based on questions, testing it to try and falsify it. And then if you can't falsify it, you would accept that tentatively as the explanation. They work by having the conclusion first, finding the evidence. If anything is against that evidence, you find something else based on faith to make sure you get to that conclusion. And that's what I think they're doing.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think they do that with the resurrection and the whole Jesus stuff too, which would be a whole nother conversation, would be super, super interesting. I'm not a
mythicist. I'm not a mythicist.
No, I'm not talking about whether Jesus existed. I'm talking about the resurrection.
The supernatural stuff. I generally just go with consensus on stuff, because of course I'm not an expert in anything, really. Like, I'm really not. But I will go with the consensus on stuff, because as far as we know, that is usually the most accurate based upon our prior experience.
Sure.
So I will generally just go with that.
Yeah. No, I was just relating the idea that Jesus rose from the dead is like a foundational thing. So when they go looking for evidence, it's similar in the young earth thing, or creation arguments. Jesus rose from the dead. That's the starting point. And then you just look to find anything that'll support that may be plausible becomes evidence, and anything that kind of counters it, you have an excuse for. And that seems to be the whole function of, modern apologetics. Do you have a call for anything specific that you would any particular person you would love to have an email from and say, hey, Mark, I want to debate you? Is there like some dream list or dream topics you have?
I would like to debate David Wood. I find him fascinating. Just the, his origin story to his arguments seem to be pragmatic ones for Christianity, i.e., the world would be bad if there wasn't Christianity. And that's not an argument for Jesus rising from the dead, right?
Sure.
That's just an argument that it does good things in the world. One of the big fallacies I found lately that has been amazing for pointing out our flaws in thinking is an appeal to consequence. And what that means is you're basically saying, well, something must be true, because if it wasn't, that would be horrible. And it's like, but reality doesn't care if it's horrible. You're basically saying, it's kind of like that thing in the Bible where it says, like, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then all of our faith is in vain or whatever. It's like, well, that could well be true. Like, just because the consequence is bad doesn't mean that it's not true. So, I think that applies there, that he's sort of saying, hey, people would be more primitive, they would be more horrible, Islam would take over. That's a lot of his stuff. It's like, none of this is an argument for the truth of God or Christianity or whatever. All it is saying, hey, it's very useful.
This is when on Modern Day Debates, when Mike Jones debated Lawrence Krauss, they started off saying, well, Mike Jones conceded this isn't about the truth of Christianity. I just think it would make the world better. I think this is an important debate, and I'm wanting to make more videos and talk and dive into that issue more. Have you debated that specific thing, and or are you looking to, besides with David Wood, like in general, the proposition the world would be better secular humanist, or the world would be better Christian?
I'd love to get more into that, because I think secular humanism, it hasn't been sort of as a sort of, I would call it a philosophy. Some people call it a religion. I think it lacks the basic sort of worship elements and, you know, sort of thing to be a religion. But as a philosophy, I think it's absolutely amazing. It's definitely a moral framework, and it doesn't get that much attention. So I love to debate it. I was supposed to go up against Andrew Wilson, but he did not have the fortitude to debate me on it, and cancelled a half an hour before. So we basically did a no-show.
Oh,
so
that's tough. Are you doing, when you do a lot of your debates, are you going on other platforms or on your own, or is it a mix? Or
I generally will go on other platforms. I occasionally will have someone that wants to debate, and I'll sort of find a moderator kind of thing. But there's very few people, because I don't want them to be on my channel and go, well, I've got to give Mark the advantage. I want it to be a fair, level playing field. So, you know, people like Justin from Skeptic Spin, Joe from the Kentucky Atheist, he's moderated a few debates. They know that you know, I don't want advantage, and they're they know me well enough to just go, no, I'm going to stand up to this guy, and rightly so. You know, I really want no favoritism. But I used to go on to Standing for Truth, but he can't seem, you know, nobody over there can seem to find lately that you know, they want to debate me. I keep challenging Donnie himself. As I said, he keeps denying and saying no. So yeah, I generally, it's modern day debate. I got to the Raging Tomato a couple of times recently, and that was very good. Except for, I mean, Jim Bob was terrible, but there was nothing wrong with the platform. You know, that was totally fine. I did a 2v2 versus Alex and another guy. I can't remember his name, but these two guys, and that was a very good debate. That was very good. Corin, I believe, was my partner on that, and they were very good. And you know, so I don't have a problem with that platform. Just some of the people that hang around there are a bit dodgy.
Is it better if a debate's moderated by two people, so there's kind of like one from each side moderating? Does that help or make it worse?
I don't think so. I think that as long as they are neutral and understand what they're doing, I think it's fine. I don't think that two moderators are needed, and I think that's confusing as to who's in charge. You know, obviously one person will be in charge because you've got to make a decision. So moderation, right? Like it's kind of like when you go into a debate, the moderator is like a referee in sport. Okay, you don't have to agree with all of the things, but going into a debate, you've agreed to. Basically, they're the ref. You know, they're the ones that's going to be calling the shots. So I think that people going in there and going, "Oh, you're terrible moderator. You don't know. You know, this kind of stuff is really bad because you've already agreed that they're going to make the decisions. You know, you've already agreed to that going into the debate. So I think that when you do that, it's like somebody going to play a sport and then whinging about the ref. It's like, yeah, they might be, but you've agreed to play the sport with that referee. Just wear the call, you know, like don't be a bad sport and go, oh, well, you know, I'm not doing it now. And, you know, ducking out. It's just, you know, they might make a wrong decision. Sure.
Yeah.
So
have you ever moderated yourself, and do you like to, and you enjoy that?
Yeah. I think so. I've definitely moderated myself. I'm a bit stricter when it comes to moderation. Naturally, I can certainly like ask and say, "Hey, do you want this to be more structured and strict, or do you want me to let you, you know, dumpster a little or whatever?" But generally, I lean towards having more control, so both have equal time. So yeah, I've moderated before. It's not an easy job to do. I've noticed that you know you're doing a good job as a moderator when both sides say you're terrible. Right, that you favor the other person, right? Because I've been in that situation before. I've done a moderation for a debate, and then one side says, "Oh, you gave the other guy so much leeway," and then the other side saying, "Hey, you gave that side so much leeway." It's like I think I'm spot on then because both of you are angry at me. So, you know.
Yeah, that's good. All righty. Anything else where people can find you just on YouTube? Is there any other links? Okay.
Yeah, just look up Mark Reed on YouTube. I should be the first one up. Mark Reed Atheism is my handle, and I do counter apologetics and, you know, big thoughts, I guess.
And is there any regular shows you're on you'd like to promote or talk about?
Yeah. Generally, I will do a show that's aimbot, which is Am I Morally Bankrupt or Them? It's essentially going through Reddit, Am I the Arsehole, and applying to everyday situations whether we can use secular humanism as a moral system to interpret it. So generally, I'll just go through and say, why is this moral? And mine is based upon human well-being. So whatever's bad for well-being, well, I see that as bad, and whatever's good for well-being, I see that as good, and it's as simple as that. And so usually it's going through, but it's the discussion of why something is good or bad, or why something gets due to something moral or not. That's the interesting part. And I love hearing different people, because some people will just be like, yeah, I don't like it because it sucks. And it's like, well, why? Like, why?
Right.
But I also do on my Friday, which is Thursday night Eastern time, a fundamentalist fails, where I look at just religious people. It's not always fundamentalist, but usually because they make the most absurd claims. Like I said, I've got a fondness for absurdity. So people like Ray Comfort and Frank Turek and, people like that, just breaking them down and showing where their thinking is utterly, utterly flawed and, sometimes very hilarious.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. Are you well schooled in sort of the quantum physics, first cause, Kalam? Are you informed in that to kind of counter some of it? Have you done that before?
Yeah, so I am a dabbler in quantum physics. I'm not a physicist. I do know a few. The one I most talk to is Vandy, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, who is a physicist, works with high power lasers and quantum states and things. So I really lean on other people being experts in their field. Don't get me wrong. Philosophy, I'm more of a dabbler in philosophy. I do understand a lot of it. It comes naturally to me, but I would never call myself a doctor in philosophy or anything like that, or an expert. I really like it, but and the Kalam is interesting. It doesn't get you to a god. The original Kalam, right? The Kalam is basically all things that exist have a cause. The universe has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That's essentially the Kalam. That you've noticed there's no God anywhere in there. That's the thing. You've got to add a whole load of stuff. Now, going through the premises just quickly, number one, we don't know the universe began to exist. That's the thing. The universe could have always been here in some other state, for instance, because things, and I pointed this out before, things don't usually begin to exist. They just change state. That's our understanding of it. So, I've sort of pointed out, have you ever heard of shipper thesis?
Yes, of course.
Theseus?
Yeah.
Right. But you could also apply it to beginnings. Like, when did that ship begin to exist? Was it when the planks were laid down, when it was the sails that were put up? If it left the harbor and realized, we forgot to add an anchor, was it not a ship until it goes back and gets the anchor to complete it? Like, at what point do we say that is a ship? And it seems to be...
I know the answer from Cameron Bertuzzi. The minute the thought of the idea of a ship happened in the timeless, spaceless, immaterial mind, that's when it became a ship.
Yeah, so Neoplatonism, basically.
Checkmate. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, if the budget runs out and the ship's never built and it sits and rots away on the beach, was it a ship in the first place? And if I have that thought of building a ship and then the ship exists, if I then go, well, that's a stupid idea, I can't build a ship, does it then dematerialize? Because there becomes a whole load of questions of absurdity, because I never even chopped down a tree to make the ship. How could we say it began to exist? Very, very strange thought, that. Very, very strange thought. And I do have an argument against Platonic ideals as well, which is just hilarious that it was taken from a cartoon show called Rick and Morty.
I love Rick and Morty.
You love Rick and Morty, right? So
Yeah.
here's the plumbus argument against Platonic ideals, right? Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon, who wrote the show, they were doing alternative television. Do you remember this episode? They made up a plumbus, right? They never said what it did, but they had the idea in their head that you had this gadget called a plumbus, and it it was like an instructional video. You've got to make sure the sneed is well rubbed. None of that means anything. Okay, they just made it up as something absurd. But according to Platonic ideals, because I can buy a plumbus on the internet, that exists now, right? The plumbus has to exist because I can buy one on the internet. It has to, according to Platonic ideals. But what does it mean that, you know, you have a Platonic plumbus when it is nonsense to begin with? The whole idea of the joke was that it was something that doesn't exist. Like as part of its actual description is that it doesn't exist. It's not a thing. That is its identity, is something absurd that doesn't exist.
It's an imaginary social construct like states and governments and the United States and Mexico and borders.
According to the Platonics, as soon as they thought of this plumbus in their heads, that existed for everybody in an objective way. Yeah. And that's absurd. You know, that becomes absurd because a plumbus isn't a real thing. It's just something these two idiots came up with to be something in an alternative dimension where it exists. You know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of thinking that way, we could say, well, there must be a Platonic Super Mario and a Platonic, you know, Donkey Kong somewhere, and a Platonic, you know, anything that I make up. You know, I make up Captain Awesome, the superhero, you know, with underpants superhero. You know, like
this reminds me of a late Robert Heinlein book, The Number of the Beast. And in that world, anybody that wrote a book created a parallel or like an Everett's mini world kind of a different universe. Yeah. So in the hero in the story builds like a spaceship, but it's not really a spaceship. It traverses universe to universe. So they're being chased by some baddies. I can't remember the whole story, but what they do is they have the ship materialize over Long Beach, take a snapshot, and then go to the next one. And they would go through a series of Long Beaches, and then they would analyze how many radio stations, how many TV stations, what was the dress, if any, of sunbathers on the beach, what was the weather, the water. They would take all these metrics, and then they would be able to build a list of which worlds were relatively safe. Like lots of happy families, women in bikinis on a beach would mean, okay, pluralistic society, you know, multiple skin colors, tons of radio waves, like there's tons of FM stations, tons of TV stations. Where if they landed in a universe where everyone was in a burqa and there was only one TV station, they'd that universe went to fascism. We need to avoid it. So super interesting. And Rick and Morty, of course, deal with that same idea when like Rick shows up in a universe and meets himself in the form of a hornet, and it's, do you guys like fascism here? And it's like the next thing he's running down the street and all the fascists are trying to kill him.
But in a Platonic way, that must exist, right? Like this gets to the absurdity of it. Whereas me as a nominalist who just says, hey, we've got these things we put labels on, these universals that we just use as labels. Like where the ship isn't, you know, a Platonic ideal, it's just a label that we slap on something when it sort of not arbitrarily, but when it sort of rationally looks like a ship or behaves like a ship, we slap that label on it. We might not even be right. So these universals, I think, are just abstractions. They're just from our mind. We think of this possibility in our mind, and it is just an abstraction. It's not a real thing. But you know, the Platonist would say, oh, it is a real thing, and it leads you down to these wacky scenarios. You know, like you know, the Hornet world, because someone's thought of it. It has to exist in a Platonic way somewhere. It's just, you know, are we really going to do that? Like, really?
No, I think that gets a little ridiculous. All right, well, my world's not going to exist anymore if I don't go home my wife with the baby. Mark, it's been amazing.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure for me too. We'll do some more stuff again. Bye, everybody. Make sure you check out Mark's links, and I will see you later. Adios.
Laws of logic are just not an inherent property of the universe. It doesn't invalidate that at all.
Because Mark, let me answer.
Come on. Hold on, Jim Bob. Let him go.
Because what I am saying is the descriptors that we call the laws of logic, like the laws of logic are a law of identity, A equals A. There is nowhere out in the universe that exists. It's just a descriptor of what is true.